Okay, well, we will get started with our lunch and learn for this month. First of all, thank you all for joining us. We're excited to talk to everyone about icings, frostings, and fillings and the food safety that surrounds them. So first of all, I'm Hannah Hansen. I'm the Food Safety Extension Specialist here at the Food Innovation and Business Hub at Iowa State University. And we're going to just jump right into it. See, let's get my screen going. There we go. So our goal today is to talk about if these particular recipes for an icing, frosting, or filling require temperature control, time temperature control for safety. This term sometimes seems a little overwhelming for folks, and so we like to make sure we're all talking the same lingo. And so other ways to kind of think through this in this regard is by asking, does my recipe for my frosting, filling, or icing require refrigeration or cooling? Can this recipe be left out at room temperature? Or is my recipe shelf stable? These are all getting around the same concept is my product safe to be left outside of refrigeration? And before we jump into this, it's important that we all remember that all food will eventually spoil. Whether it be the bananas that are sitting out on our counter browning and getting mushy, or the milk in our refrigerator, is that all food, with maybe the exception of some canned products that are known to last for quite some time, all food has some sort of shelf life that we have to be cognizant of as a food producer or someone making food for human consumption. Some foods will spoil faster than others. And if we raise the temperature, so for example, take something outside of refrigeration, then likely the spoilage is going to happen faster. Good example of this is milk. If we leave it in the refrigerator, we know we are going to extend the shelf life, but if we leave it on our counter, we know that that shelf life will be shortened. And so that's something we have to remember as we go through this process. And so when we talk about icing, frostings, and fillings, we're talking about a number of recipes and applications. And ultimately, there's one theme, is that this is a complex food matrix. And you might be thinking at this point, really frostings especially are really mainly two things, powdered sugar and butter. And although this is true for many recipes, there are many iterations and variances on this. As well as when we think about food, it's not just one ingredient. Each food is made up of building blocks such as water, protein, carbohydrate, fat, and ash, for example. And each of these groups has its own subcategories. A good example is carbohydrates. There's many different types of carbohydrates. There's simple sugars, there's complex carbohydrates. And as we make a food product, we're combining ingredients that each have unique matrices and making an overall food product that has a complex matrix and interactions of these components. This is especially complicated by the fact that, yes, many frostings are mainly butter and powdered sugar, but as we know, we want to make many things that have many different ingredients that add to the complexity. These ingredients have functions, whether it be to help us get the right texture, the right taste, the right flavor. But ultimately, they do change the matrix and the interactions of these ingredients. And so we have to be aware of this as we move forward with the concept of, is my icing, frosting, or filling safe to leave outside of refrigeration? And so really it gets back to the overarching concept of food preservation. Our goal in food preservation is to extend shelf life, and mainly the goal in this is to slow spoilage by controlling microorganisms' ability to grow or produce toxins. There are various methods this is done, but ultimately the concept of these is leaning in that microorganisms are just that. They're small living things that are all around us and are present in our food. And so microorganisms, just like us, require food, water, and certain environmental conditions to grow. And so our goal in food preservation is to take advantage of one of those to prevent their ability to grow. Various techniques include lowering the temperature and time, such as in time temperature control for safety foods, lowering the amount of water that they have available to them, or changing the environment, such as the pH or the oxygen conditions, to prevent their growth. When we're talking about icings, frostings, and fillings, mainly our goal is to lower the available water. Now, I want to point out that I'm not just saying lowering water. I'm talking about lowering what water is available to the microorganisms. If we remember back, food matrices are complex and things interact. And so sugar and water is a great example of an interaction. And so in food preservation, instead of focusing on the total water in a food product, we focus on a concept called water activity. Water activity is the measure of available water. If we think about foods that are highly perishable, such as milk or fresh fruits and vegetables, they have a high amount of available water, meaning there's water available to the microorganisms for use. When we preserve foods, such as in jams and jellies, we are lowering the amount of available water to a level where microorganisms are not able to use it. And so in that application, we're adding sugar. And so a similar concept is going to be applied here with frostings, fillings, and icings. And so overarching why we're here today is that historically in the state of Iowa, the options for shelf-stable icings, frostings, and fillings have been limited unless you did an intensive analysis or review of your product. And so our goal today is to provide a science-based option to determine what outcome your particular recipe would have. And so we're first going to start off with talking about what is required for an icing, frosting, or filling recipe to be non-TCS, or remember back to not require refrigeration, or to be shelf-stable. And so the overarching process is 3 simple steps. The first step is an important one that sometimes may be overlooked. And so this is an important step to spend time in. The first and foremost, we have to determine a standardized recipe. And what we mean by this is we have to list what ingredients we're going to be using, the quantities of the ingredients we're going to be using, and the process steps for that particular recipe. It's important that the standardized recipe uses the ingredient quantities by weight, and we'll get into that more here in just a minute. After we have a standardized recipe, the next step is to put this through our flow chart that helps us to determine if the recipe is appropriate for this application. The last step is to calculate the amount of added sugar in your recipe. This will help us understand how much sugar is in the recipe to determine if it can be non-TCS. And again, I just want to reiterate that the amount of added sugar is key in this process. The sugar and the water interact to reduce the available water to the microorganisms so that we can ensure safety in the recipe. So the first step is to determine your standardized recipe. It's important that the ingredient quantities are in a weight basis by grams. There's 2 ways to accomplish this. We can weigh our ingredients with a kitchen scale, or we can convert or calculate it. Best practice is going to be to weigh your ingredients because this is going to help ensure that the right proportions of ingredients are had every time. This also helps you ensure a repeatable product in your finished product. When you use volumetric or measuring cups or household measurements, these have a high amount of variance depending on how you measure the product. If you sift your ingredients, if you don't, if you tap your measuring cup to get it full, those can all very much impact how much you add. So weighing is the gold standard when it comes to a repeatable recipe. If this isn't an option, there are other ways to do this by converting or calculating the amount using weight equivalents. This is a table that will be available in the resource that comes out in the coming weeks. Again, I just want to reiterate that this process of converting and calculating is a possibility, but it is complicated, as sometimes when you're converting something like a third of a cup of water, for example, you have to go through multiple conversion steps in order to get the proper amount of grams of water. After you've done your standardized recipe, the next step is to put your recipe through a flow chart that we have. This flow chart is pictured to the right here. In this flow chart, we have you ask various questions to help understand where your product should land. There are 3 outcomes in this process flow chart. You might come out that your product needs temperature control for safety. You might need support or review by a food safety expert, or you might come out that your recipe can be non-TCS. The first question in this flowchart is asking if your standardized recipe contains ingredients that are not allowed. A group of food safety experts came together and said that these ingredients are not appropriate for this type of application due to the risk around food safety. The ingredients that are not allowed to be put through this process include raw eggs in uncooked applications, raw flours in uncooked applications, unpasteurized dairy products such as raw milk, and any meat or seafood. If you answer yes to this question, then your product requires temperature control for safety. If you answer no, you can continue on through this flowchart. The next question you would ask yourself is, does my standardized recipe contain higher risk ingredients? These ingredients include things like cream cheese, sour cream, cottage cheese, yogurt, or equivalent products. And you might be thinking cream cheese is a pretty big ingredient when we're talking about frostings, and frankly is something that really helped us get here today because a lot of folks love cream cheese frosting, myself included. But when we look at these products are highly perishable and bring a lot of things to the recipe that microorganisms love, just like we do. And so that's why it's important that these higher risk ingredients have an additional review step to ensure that the proper procedures are taken to maintain public health. Additional ingredients that we considered higher risk ingredients includes cooked fruit or vegetable-based recipes. So think about a filling that might be in a bar or something, as an example. Additionally, raw fruits or vegetables. This definition includes produce that has been frozen and thawed, as well as freeze-dried fruits or vegetables. Again, that one is probably a question that's going to come up, but when we think about freeze-drying removes the moisture, as well as provides that shelf stability for that produce. But when we put it back into a frosting recipe, there's opportunity for rehydration and the ability of microorganisms in that recipe. So there's an additional review step there. This definition does not include the zest or juice from citrus fruits, and that's due to these being very low pH or acidic that provides an additional control for food safety. If you answer yes to this question, my recipe has one or more of these higher risk ingredients, then we ask that a food safety expert review and determine the outcome of your recipe. If you answer no, you can proceed to the third step, which is calculating the amount of added sugar in your ingredient. Just to ensure we're all aligned, up to this point, we've established a standardized, consistent recipe. We've weighed or converted our ingredient quantities to grams, and we can then calculate the percent of added sugar. This is to be done for every recipe, even if there's a small change. A good example of a small change is adding coloring. If you add coloring, each one of those recipes needs to be put through this process and documented appropriately. When our resource comes out in the coming weeks, the resource has examples of recipes that this process has been applied to that you can use for reference to help you understand and apply to your own recipes. If we remember, 65% added sugar is the key here. If you calculate this out and your recipe is less than 65% added sugar by weight, you need to consult a food safety expert to determine your outcome. If your recipe is 65% or more added sugar by weight, then you can proceed with a non-TCS recipe. With the yellow boxes, it can be overwhelming if you come out in the yellow box, and the hub is here to help. We have myself as a food safety expert, as well as a team that can help you determine next steps for your product. We have on our website an intake form. That's a great place to start to get oriented to our group, where you will be put into contact with the proper people to understand what you need help with and to support next steps. So that is the overall process for determining if a recipe, determine the outcome for a recipe. But food safety is more than just creating a formulation that's 65% sugar or goes through this process. In order to ensure a safe product, there also needs to be additional considerations in this. So I'd like to go through a few as good reminders of best practices. So first of all, these products, icings, frostings, and fillings, are typically eaten by a consumer without further processing. The way we term that is they're ready to eat. And so as a food producer, we have to ensure that good hygiene practices are used to prevent contamination of the food. This includes, but is not limited to, good hand washing practices, using gloves when appropriate, maintaining clean equipment and workspace through sanitation, and making sure we properly store and handle our ingredients all the way through to delivering the product to the consumer. We have to ensure that contamination is prevented throughout the process. Additionally, many applications of some of these products could be fairs or farmers markets. And since we have lovely weather here in Iowa, when those are taking place, we typically have very high temperatures and humidity when those are taking place. And if you remember back, we talked about that spoilage is still going to occur in these products. And if we leave them in elevated temperatures for elongated times, then that spoilage will continue to take place, even if we go through this process. So special care needs to be taken, especially when we're going to be exposing our product to higher temperatures. Additionally, higher temperatures impact the quality of these products. An additional consideration is that many of the frostings, fillings, and icings contain a major allergen. Currently, in the United States, we have 9 major allergens identified. We have milk, eggs, fish, crustacean shellfish, tree nuts, peanuts, wheat, soybeans, and sesame. If your recipe contains one of these, then there is a requirement through various regulations, to have these labeled on your product. Additionally, sub-ingredients are required to be labeled, and allergens can sometimes hide in the sub-ingredients. A great example of this is butter. Butter is made from milk as one ingredient, and so milk is an allergen that butter adds to a recipe. There are many other examples where allergens can be hidden. A common one would be chocolate chips. Chocolate chips can contain soy to help in the recipe. That being said, it's important to know what you're putting into your product and ensure that your consumer can make an informed choice. And the only way they can do this is if you label your product properly. And the last additional consideration I'd like to highlight is that to make a quality product, we have to start with quality ingredients. So we will need to be sure that our product is being made with products that are not close to their expiration or expired. All of this being said, the safety of a product is really up to the producer. We here at Iowa State can help support understanding and help to determine, help to support the outcome, but ultimately a safe product is the responsibility of the producer. So we hope that this process helps to get you to that path, and we are here to support. So the resource that this material was taken from is anticipated to be released in September. And the webinar we're recording will also be up soon. But in the meantime, we wanted to get this information out there to folks so they could start looking at their information and start doing the review. We are here to help and realize this is a new process and new approach. So we would love to have a conversation with you. Again, this is the QR code for our intake form, and we would love to hear from you and help answer any questions that maybe go above and beyond the webinar that we're doing here today. With that, we'll just finish out with the upcoming events for the hub, and then we'll open it up to questions. So our upcoming Lunch and Learns are on the screen. The one I would like to highlight is that in December, we're going to revisit frostings, fillings, and icings to help clarify any questions that might have come up, as well as just come to center again on these, because we know December's a very heavy baking time for everybody. We have a few in-person trainings that I wanted to highlight that relate to food safety. So in mid-November, November 10th, 11th, and 12th, we'll be hosting the Preventative Controls for Human Food version 2.0. Registration is open for that. That will be hosted by Dr. Jim Dixon and myself, and look forward to having a great group again. And then in February, we are hosting another session of Better Process Control School. We will be offering the full session, and it will take place on February 8th, 9th, and 10th. The registration will be opening soon for this, but we wanted to get the date out there for folks to mark their calendar. And with that, that is all we have for presentation-wise, so I'd like to open it up to questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Hannah, for a great presentation, number one, but also for all your hard work on the upcoming resource that will be available, and also diving into the science with me a little bit, and sorting out this frosting hot topic, let's say, that we've been looking at for a while. We have a couple of questions in the chat so far, but please feel free to use the chat to write out your questions. And also, I just want to also say we will definitely be available after this webinar at our email address. Make sure I get that into the chat while Hannah's answering some questions. I did put up the Lunch and Learn recordings. The Lunch and Learn recordings link. So that's where this will be. Give us about a week or so to get the recording up, but the previous Lunch and Learns are there. So first question coming in, you were talking about butter, and I think you were talking about butter in terms of allergens, but let's just make sure we clear this one up. So butter was not listed as a high-risk ingredient or as a not allowed ingredient. So that means that butter is fine in our frosting, correct?
Yes.
So butter is fine,
correct.
but it does give us a milk allergen that we at least need to be aware of. Yep. A potential milk allergen.
Yes.
Okay. So butter, totally fine. Thank you. But that's a good clarification to make. Someone did ask, and I know, and I appreciate Gail chiming in on this, and I just want to address it. Will this information be shared with 4-H to broaden the frosting options for fair exhibition? And Gail, thank you so much for being here from 4-H and answering. I'm going to read out Gail's answer. 4-H at this point is not prepared to make decisions on changing up their allowed frostings. But we have been working, and we've started some of those discussions with Gail and her team and the Answer Line team. So stay tuned for any changes to 4-H. But at the moment, we are continuing with the approved frosting recipe as previously published with Dr. Coleman and M4H. So that's what we can say right now. We'll make sure that the information gets out there if there's any changes. Another question coming in, Hannah. So we can't use freeze-dried fruit powder. So we can't add freeze-dried fruit powder to buttercream frosting? Question mark. Doesn't that help with the amount of water being added into the buttercream?
So I don't want to say can't. We identified that freeze-dried fruits needed further review. So if that is something that applies to you and you'd like to do, contact us. And basically what we'll do is we'll review your recipe specific to you, likely get some samples to do some testing, and then based on the outcome, we can provide a letter basically saying, yep, this is fine, or provide feedback on maybe some things to change if it doesn't meet those requirements. So it's not that you can't, it's just that that was identified as a higher risk ingredient. So we just would need to do that extra review step, which we can do for you. Erin's lab can do the testing, and then we can provide you a letter, you know, based on the outcome. So we're happy to have that conversation with you if that's something you'd like to do.
We've got another question about fillings and fruit. As far as fillings, are jams and jellies okay for that application?
Are we talking about store-bought jams and jellies?
Good question. Let's cover both.
Okay. So jams and jellies that are bought from the store are okay today, as far as I'm aware. I'm assuming the cottage law is what this individual is asking about. If you are going to make your own and use as a filling, maybe I'm guessing this is more where the question would be from. This is kind of in the same realm of a non-standardized jam or jelly. So we want to take that in and have a review step to kind of align on the thinking across the board, both with how we handle jams and jellies, as well as if you're going to use it as a filling. We would just ask that you contact us, provide your recipe, standardized recipe. It's very important terminology. And then likely get a few samples and do some testing, and again, provide you that review and letter. So it just depends on which approach you're talking about. Hopefully that clears it up.
So someone uses a recipe that is standardized. So they're saying they use the ball recipe. So coming out from, excuse me, I do believe though that's still going to fall under homemade, and us at the lab, we haven't tested that particular recipe. So we would want to test that. Jams and jellies that are purchased from the store are the ones that, that's the segregation that we're making. Ones that are purchased from the store, if they're made at home, even with a well-known recipe, we do recommend that review with the lab.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah, I think that goes into some of the variants that can be added in, and how long are you cooking it. And obviously if you're following standardized, again, that's great, but you know, crop can change year to year. We have to be certain from a food safety perspective that you are reaching, you know, we're talking about sugar, the amount of sugar, but really in the sub note, we're talking about what water activity are you getting to. And so ultimately, we have to be sure you're getting to a low enough water activity that you are controlling the risk of the growth of microorganisms. And so that's really where, unfortunately, you know, we do have to take a very conservative approach, because we want to make sure that we're maintaining public health. And so, yes, aligned with Erin's approach on, even with a standardized recipe, we still are going to want to make sure we get to that proper water activity.
A couple other questions coming in, Hannah. Milk is allowed, or they're asking if milk is allowed as long as it's pasteurized, correct? Or do they need to ensure the amount of sugar to dairy ratio is appropriate?
So I know it gets a little confusing. I thought through how to talk about this in my mind, because I knew there were going to be questions. Hey, we can't do cream cheese without a review, but we can do milk. And when you think about the recipes that would utilize those, milk is used in a very small amount, right? Usually 2, maybe 3 tablespoons in a recipe, versus cream cheese is the base of the recipe. And so the amount of sugar you need to preserve the safety in 2 to 3 tablespoons of milk is very different than how much you would need for a block of cream cheese. And so milk, absolutely okay. If you think about it, if you use so much milk that you get to a higher percentage, then it falls out of this process, right? It's not going to be appropriate. So that's where kind of the difference is, and hopefully that makes sense on that, the different thinking there.
Another question coming in, and I'll can they use flavorings, extracts to flavor their frostings?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. So in
Yep. But
general,
again,
those are
if
added in
you,
small amounts. Yeah, go
yep,
ahead,
small
Anna.
amounts. Again, the thing that can get a little tricky, again, each recipe. So let's say you have a recipe with 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract, one with vanilla and almond extract, one with lemon extract. I mean, right? Those are all different recipes. And so those all require the review process. And something I probably didn't hit on as much as I wanted to is that when you do this, in the resource, there's a page, a worksheet essentially that we've created that you can go through and check off and write out your process and write it out. And that's your document. That's your story saying, hey, I've gone through the review. I know that I am good to go here. It's important in this process to document it, because that shows you did the review, that shows you did, and that's why we would provide you a document if the outcome is favorable for your recipe, because ultimately that's your way of showing you went through the process and you can be confident it's safe. So for each recipe, back to the question, right? So.
And I just want to reiterate two things. Excuse me. Firstly, Hannah brought up a good point about saying, oh, I assume this person is talking about being under the cottage food law. If you have questions about where you fall and where you fit in, if you have a home-based food operator, or if you are under the cottage law, or if you are not in either of those, and you have some questions, please reach out to us. We are happy to walk through what your particular situation is. It's hard sometimes in these presentations to really get into the nitty-gritty about the different, the fine differences between them, but we are here to help and support you. The other thing I wanted to reiterate is that when we say, we want your recipe to come in for a review, and we do have a process for that, and we'll walk you through that if we get to that stage. I want to make sure that we're not going to just jump right into that recipe review. Someone from the lab team, myself, or there's a couple other staff, perhaps Hannah as well, will talk about your situation and figure out what is the best way forward. For example, I had a conversation with someone last week. They have a recipe where a lot less sugar to the ratio of a cream cheese is being used. And so I'm not ready to take them to the next step of validating that recipe, because I'm not going to make them pay for all of that analysis and the recipe review report. I'm going to check that recipe first off to make sure that it's worthwhile for us to go forward. So we want to work with you. My point here is we want to work with you to figure out what's best and what works for your situation, and get you the answers that that you need. And let's say this person's recipe is not is not able to be left out of the refrigerator. We'll work with them to see how do we get to the next step to and try and give you some options and things like that. Somebody else asked, and somebody asked earlier as well, when will the slides for the PowerPoint be put out? We put out the recordings of these presentations. Give us about a week to get the document or the file edited and looking pretty and whatnot, and then it will be up on our website. At the top of the chat, I listed the link, but I'm going to do that once again just so that it's closer at hand.
Also, a call out there too,
Yep.
Erin. The slides were essentially taken from the resource. we will be posting. It's actually, it sounds overwhelming. It's almost a 10-page resource, but it's very spread out and nice on the eyes. And so it's not 10 full pages of text. Just want to caveat that. But the things that we took were directly from that resource, and that'd be a great resource for you to print and have. And if you have a food safety binder or just for your records, download the PDF. That'll be available on the extension store. We're anticipating in September. It's still just going through some last reviews and edits, and it takes a little bit of time to get through that. So September would be a great time to get not the slides, but the resource that will help you have the same information essentially.
And I even said earlier, these presentations, we collect all of the attendees' names and emails. We will make sure that anyone attending this presentation right now, we will email you that resource when it becomes available because, well, it seems like you're here and you're already invested in this topic. So we want to make sure to get it out to you. 2 questions we've got coming in. Is there a standardized ratio of cream cheese to powdered sugar? This is, again, part of that hot topic we've been, Hannah, take it away.
Unfortunately, that's not the approach that we felt was the most effective. So again, with cream cheese, especially when you start applying it to, you know, a lot of the folks that are really interested in it are taking these to farmers markets and sitting them out in elevated temperatures. We believe that we really need to have a conversation with a producer to help make sure they, you know, we understand what they're doing. We make sure they get to the right water activity. You know, there's different types of cream cheeses, different formula. You know, we need to make sure that the outcome is truly going to result in a safe product, just because it is a very nutritious product for microorganisms. And so we want to make sure that each of the recipes and processes are reviewed to ensure that, you know, ultimately that person is going to be making a safe product. So unfortunately, there's not. Could you back calculate it? Absolutely. And kind of make sure you're at 65% and then start there. You know, even though it's a higher risk product and you fall out of the flow chart, you could calculate your added sugar to see, am I in the ballpark or am I way off? And that would give you a good indication if you need to make adjustments. But ultimately, you're going to need to come see us or another food safety expert to have it reviewed to get your justification for moving forward with it.
And a comment came in, or comment/question came in, and I think this is a really important point because we know that this may sound limiting, that we are putting some boundaries, and we want to reiterate that these are guidelines so that the safest food is out there for people to purchase and that sort of thing. So the comment was, to be offering the safest baked goods, really you should add all of the flavoring to the cake or cookie, or whatever is the base of the baked good, and have the most basic frosting to provide the most shelf stable baked good. So Hannah, do you want to comment on that? Because I totally understand where that comment is coming from. That it feels like we're asking you to make a very basic frosting. So Hannah, what would your response be?
Well, I would say ultimately here, when we go back to the principles, the goal in having some sort of public health control, our control is water activity. So if we can get to a certain water activity, then we know that can control and help maintain food safety. I would say, honestly, I kind of would say we're really actually opening up a lot of options here. You know, ultimately, you know, there were very few options, right? From what can I do under cottage that's considered shelf stable or non-TCS. So, you know, when you think about it, there's the 4-H one that was out there that was kind of weird and awkward because it was meant for 4-H and not producers. So is it okay? Is it not? commercially based frostings. I mean, there just wasn't a lot of options. And so I would say our goal is not to have a plain frosting, but ultimately, hopefully, provide a path that you can look at your frosting, determine frosting, icing, filling, determine if you can go forward with it, and with caution, because ultimately our goal is to help educate and ensure a safe product, and there's many things I think that can flow right through to the process. So if someone feels frustrated or is uncertain or confused, again, that's what we're here for, is to have the conversation and help folks understand, so that they can proceed forward, and be innovative, right? We're the Food Innovation and Business Hub. We want to see innovation, and we want to see people doing things they're passionate about, just like we are. So hopefully that makes a little more sense. But honestly, the options I think are much higher with this process, but also a cautious approach forward, to make sure that we're having a safe process going forward. And so hopefully that makes sense. I know it's a pretty generic answer, but I see this as opening options. And I think the other thing is this is a living process, right? We knew the hub is here to help support, and I started over a year ago now, which is crazy. And the reoccurring theme was frosting. And so we wanted to take this head on. And I think that's a great call out, is if there's opportunities for us to explore providing guidance and clarifying, but again, still going forward with a safe process. That's our goal here. So definitely reach out with other things as well. But through this process, really providing that guidance, but still having a safe process going forward.
Hannah, there's two questions that have come in, and I think really good ones in terms of clarification. So,
Yep.
will all recipes with cream cheese require lab testing?
Likely, likely at first for sure, because we're establishing data, we're establishing trends, but I would say most of the time, yes. And so, but the thing is, as we go through this process, as we get data, as we can, if the science is there and justifies the approach, that's really where we're at, is really leaning into the science. And we knew with this coming out, and that's why we're kind of having the conversation again in December, is it's a point for clarification, a point for additional questions, maybe additional examples, all of those good things. So it's a living process, but right now I would say likely the answer is yes.
And then there's a comment about using, and this is not something we've talked about a lot. So this may put you a little bit on the spot, Hannah, but the idea of using coolers or mini fridges as a cottage baker. So perhaps at a farmer's market and using a cooler while you're at the farmer's market. Can you speak to that and
Yep.
the
Yeah.
frostings?
Yeah, so ultimately under cottage, you are not able to do TCS foods or time temperature control for safety foods, right? But that being said, cooling is helpful in a quality perspective, right? Especially when we're talking about frostings. Right. I've dabbled in making frostings. It's gone well, it hasn't gone well, but trying to get that texture and maintaining your piping and all of those great things. So I would say coolers are still a critical thing for quality for some of these products. And so you have to understand why you're using the cooling. If you've gone through this process and your frosting is non-TCS, but you decide to use a cooler to maintain the quality, or you just know you're going to be in elevated temperatures and you want to have an extra layer, that's okay. But if you determine, or your temperature control is for the safety of the product, technically it's not allowed under cottage. So hopefully that clarifies. But I'd say if you're using it for quality, or because you're just aware you're going to be in high temperatures, I think that's fine.
Great. And one other comment to your comment, Hannah, where you were saying if there's other topics that are I call them the hot topics just because, they're things we're getting asked about. And I will say that the one that I'm going to bring up right now,
I
even
already know what you're gonna say.
I know you know what I'm going to say. We, on all ends of the spectrum of the people that we interact with, let's put it that way, are asking about this. Sourdough and bread with inclusions. It's on our radar. That's all I'm going to say.
Yes.
It's on our radar, and and it's something that we have thought about diving into once we get Frostings
Yeah.
buttoned up.
And November is a great example of that. We're going to talk about sauces. Sauces are a very common thing that people like to do with their produce, and it's complicated. So we're excited to host that here later this year.
Yes, we're a small group, so there's only so much we can kind of take on at this point, but we are dedicated to helping food businesses, small, medium, large, throughout the state of Iowa, and these are exactly the kinds of things that we want to support you all with. And I'm going to give you another minute if you'd like to type any questions out in the chat. As Hannah said, we're just buttoning up that resource, which is going to be I think, a really great document for reference. It goes through some examples of calculations, and hopefully is presented in a way that is useful and what's the word? It's simple. I don't want to say simple because it's not simple, but it is easy to understand, approachable, that sort of thing. And I will again reiterate, if there's topics that you want to see us tackle, or if there's support that you need for your particular situation and your business, please reach out. We are here. We are dedicated to this. We do have a team, and yeah, we wanna help and support you. Okay, we do have two questions. You mentioned sub-ingredients. Are those required for labels in cottage baking?
Yes, they are. Sub-ingredients are required, and I will say I believe there's a huge focus on that. I've been in a few different inspections, and it's been very focused on. And I think part of it is we're still learning and still trying to get it fully complied to. But yeah, so essentially any of your ingredients need to have the sub-ingredients, whether or not there's allergens. So again, that's something we're happy to support you in if you're still like, oh, I don't know how to go. And I'll be honest, there's some bakers we've worked with. They start making their label, and they have things like Fruity Pebbles and marshmallows, and I'm trying to think of some of they're very long, or M&Ms, very long ingredient list, and they have a lot of sub ingredients, but it's just it's part of the requirement of cottage, as well as across the board, is proper labeling that includes sub ingredients.
Okay, and one other, as it's a filling, but on the pie spectrum, how do we know what is okay? Is that something we would need to submit a recipe for? So pie filling. Do you want to tackle that, Hannah?
Yes, and I would love to have a conversation off record with this individual if you would like, just because pies get complicated. This is where I would go to. Dial has a resource, an Excel sheet that you can go through, and it tells you what's okay under cottage or what's not okay, what's okay under home-based license, what's not okay. So referring to that, I'd need to pull up the specifics. Generally, if it's non-TCS, it's okay under cottage, and if it's TCS, you've gotta get licensed. And so generally that's the take, but again, it's gonna depend on your specific pie, and what the filling is. This absolutely could be applied to that filling and could be something we work through with you if you want to. There are also some that I would say have a long-standing history of safety, that have been generally accepted as okay. But this is a case-by-case basis based on your pie and based on what you're doing. But absolutely could provide you some feedback on that if that's something in your particular case. But unfortunately, the answer in this scenario is it depends. I know that's probably the most frustrating answer, but absolutely happy to have a conversation to work through where you would fall and how it would apply.
So someone asked if Hannah, if we have heard of the K-State frosting, and
Yes.
if that's going to be an okay ratio in Iowa. And I can attest to Hannah and I, that was probably the first place we went when we were developing this resource was talking to K-State, first of all, and reviewing their documents very closely. So
I would say this approach is very closely aligned with what they do as well. So theirs is laid out a little differently, but if you read through it and compare, very similar.
Yeah. Yeah.
Science is the same across the board. So cross state lines.
And then one last question here, or at least one more. And I think this is a good one. You talked about sub-ingredients and needing to have them. What about something like butter? Do they need to include milk, salt, or whatever,
Yes.
Is that required?
Yes. Whatever butter you're using, look at the label and copy it. Do not make changes. Do not change the order. Do not try to add together milk from every component no. Butter, parenthesis, sub-ingredients from the butter's label, end parenthesis, or close parenthesis.
Yeah.
Just keep it simple that way. Don't make changes.
Right. I'm trying to think of like a complicated food item at the grocery store, like a pizza. Grab a frozen pizza and see how they lay out their ingredient
that's a
list.
great example.
Because there's milk maybe in a couple different places and that sort of thing. So just as an idea.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. So Crisco there. Yes. I don't know if you have a question about Crisco, but in the same way, shortening can be used, and I believe we have it included probably in our resource in the ingredients list. Hey, Hannah, on the back page, maybe, maybe not.
I don't know if that got called out as a common one, to be honest. But I should mention, I didn't mention it on that page just because if you couldn't tell, I'm a huge advocate of weighing your ingredients. Converting is not as great. It adds some, there's math anyway. But anyway, if that's applied to kitchen scales aren't expensive, I'm gonna keep plugging for it. But if you want to convert them, first of all, if you need help, I'm happy to help you. As well as there are reputable sources out there that if we didn't put it in our chart, you can absolutely reference those. Again, I would keep a document of how you referenced and how you did your calculations. In our resource, we point you to two. There's a USDA database as well as the King Arthur one I found very good. But if it's reputable, then it's okay. But reputable, that adds some questions of what's reputable. But those were the two we used, as well as K-State study also references some. So those would be sources I would go to if you're like, hey, they didn't put my ingredient in their table. What do I do? That's where I would go.
Awesome. Okay, we're coming up on a couple minutes before the hour. Thank you so much to Hannah. Thank you so much to our participants. You guys were on it with some great questions and comments today. We knew that, well, we figured we would get some comments. Again, thank you to Gail for chiming in about 4-H. Appreciate you being here as well. And part of this is stay tuned for that resource to come out. This presentation will come out on our website, and reach out. We're here. Let's have a conversation and chat, and we'll figure out what's best for your situation. Okay, thanks everyone, and we'll see you next month for our Lunch and Learn in September.